This show is brought to you in part by viewers like you who joined a Patreon or become YouTube members. Thank you. And if you could, hit the like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
What are my biggest fears about this upcoming Cleveland Browns team? I think I have three pretty big fears about this team. I'll throw out first, before I get to my main fears, a bonus fear, if you will, right? A fear that I feel like I'm not confident they have addressed, but we'll just have to see, right? It's not one of these things you could just solve and know for 100% it's going to be solved until you see it actually work out. Field goal kicking is that fear. Look, the way the Cleveland Browns are going to try to play football, they've not tried to hide this at all. No bones about it. They are going to try to play knock down, drag them out football. And you can win games like that, but the margin of error to win games like that, very, very small. Now, maybe there's a conspiracy theory at foot here, right? For some people where it's like, hey, the Browns are going to play good enough football to be close in a lot of games, but field goal kicking is what holds their win-loss record down, which allows them to feel good about this season while also maximizing their draft position. It's not the craziest thing in the world to think might be going down, but it's definitely something that can tank the Browns' win-loss record. People talk about Mike Tomlin. Oh, he never goes under 500. He's so amazing. I think a lot of the reason Mike Tomlin has never gone below 500, on top of his abilities as a coach, has been because he has been fortunate enough to have a super consistent kicker in Chris Boswell. And if you go back and you look at Pittsburgh's seasons, there are a couple of years where you're like, they are a bad Chris Boswell season away from underwhelming expectations. But Chris always makes those kicks, and we're not just talking about the game winners, right? We're talking about like just the accumulation of field goals that he makes over the course of the year, above average from what other kickers make, and why that's so valuable when you play the way the Steelers play, which is knock down, drag them out football. Field goal kicking for the Cleveland Browns, it's going to be just as important, but we don't have the security of knowing that Dustin Hopkins is going to kick at that level. He's given us a year where he's kicked at an amazing level, but then he's given us a year where he's kicked at a truly putrid level, right? Like if you want to look at the trifecta of dog shit that was last year, I'm sorry. I try not to cuss. The trifecta of dog poo that was the Cleveland Browns offense and ability to score points last year. At the top of it was quarterback play, some of the worst quarterback play the NFL had all year. You're talking about in success rate, number 47 out of 47 in Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and right in front of him, number 46 out of 47 in Deshaun Watson. You peaked in success rate with Jameis Winston, who was only 29th out of 47. So that tells you your quarterback play was just putrid. I mean, just for most of the year, significantly below league starter or league qualifying play. Like you were just abysmal at the quarterback position. You were worse than Spencer Rattler. Like name a team, the Browns were significantly worse than that team when they had DTR or Deshaun Watson playing quarterback for them last year. It's just kind of how things shook out for them. So that's at the top of that pyramid, right? For why the Browns offense was dog doo last year. And then another part of that pyramid was awful run game. The offensive line wasn't great, pass or run. The run game didn't get any traction at all. It wasn't useful. That's a huge part of it. And that third triangle in this trifecta was field goal kicking. Right? So you didn't run the ball well. You could not throw the ball, and you couldn't kick the ball to get points. Sounds like you're going to be the worst offense in the NFL. The Browns have addressed quarterback. There are 4 new quarterbacks in that room that were not in that room last year, right? They have completely wiped out the quarterback room. The only guy standing there is Deshaun Watson, and that's the guy the ownership and the GM have both said was a swing and a miss. So don't think he's going to play anytime soon, right? So 4 new quarterbacks in that room. Makes sense. Running back room, complete revamp. Makes sense. Field goal kicking. I mean, they added Andrew Smythe. Like, that's not nothing, right? Nah, they didn't get the thicker kicker. Did they get the thicker kicker? Yeah, like Harrison Mevis, who I thought was the best kicker in the UFL last year. They didn't get him. The Jets got him, right? The thicker kicker, Mr. Mevis over there, right? But Smythe was a pretty good UFL kicker a couple of years ago, albeit in a dome. It's fine competition. I would like more competition at the kicker position, especially considering just how awful Dustin Hopkins was last year. It's the one part of that trifecta I don't feel like they did anything to really address on any significant level. It's just Harrison. Well, not Harrison. It's just Dustin Hopkins. Let me get my brain to work today. And some tryout guys. I don't feel great. I don't feel great about that at all. So that's my honorable mention fear. So maybe I should have just made it the 4th fear, but that's my honorable mention fear. We did not address that. And that was, I thought, one of the biggest problems the Browns had last year. And I don't want us to say, like, I really don't want to be at this point in like 7 months where I have to be like, well, look, man, if the Browns had a better kicker, they'd have X amount of wins, but, you know, they decided to stick it out with Dustin Hopkins. I really don't want to be at that point. Now, it could be possible that Dustin had a bad year. He shakes that off. He turns back to being amazing. Cool. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to write that off as a possibility, but I'm concerned. And I think it's fair to be concerned. The second big fear I have about this Cleveland Browns team is part of that trajectory. Right? It was that trifecta I mentioned. The Browns run game. Now, yes, I think the Browns have done a lot to address the run game. I think the Browns have spent a lot of resources in addressing that run game. Am I convinced that it's fixed? Unfortunately, because of the nature of how they address the run game, it's going to be hard to tell. I can't be definitive on that, right? I just have to have my concerns until we see these guys in pads play against real competition and really make shit happen, right? Like, that's really what it's going to come down to. The run game has been improved. You brought in Tevin Jenkins, who's a pretty good run blocker. You know, maybe he could play a role, replace what James Hudson did for this team really well in 2023. You know, you have DeJuan Jones losing weight, looking healthier. So that's really good. And then if you look at the Browns running back room, you know, 2 significant additions in Dylan Sampson, SEC run leader, also 4th round selection. And then you have Quincy Junkins, who you spent a top 40 pick on, who was one of the best running backs in college football and a part of a running back duo in Ohio State that led them to a championship. So you got some new guys in there. You have Jerome Ford still there. And look, I know a lot of people like Jerome Ford's the weirdest player to talk about because fantasy football players love Jerome Ford, but Browns fans who don't play fantasy football or draft Jerome Ford feel the polar opposite about him, right? I think Jerome Ford is fine when he gets 100 carries. You look at his numbers last year, they're pretty good for a running back that gets 100 carries. You know, he's pretty efficient. He was over 5 a pop in his yards per carry, good amount of touchdowns. I think he's a productive running back at 100 carries. Anything above or below, you're either underutilizing him or overexposing him. But 100 carries is fine, right? So I think Jerome Ford's good there, right? Quincy, I feel pretty good about his ability to play in the NFL day one. He has everything you would expect to be a day one guy. And look, Dylan Sampson, I feel good about Dylan Sampson in his career path over 4 years. My issue isn't that I don't believe Dylan Sampson will eventually be a good running back. I think all the tools are there. He was really good in the SEC, decent enough vision, really hard to tackle, slippery guy, good athlete. My concern with him is he going to be ready day one? Right? There's a difference between a player who's going to be good eventually at a position and a player who's going to be good at day one. And right now, the Browns are betting on both Quinshawn and Dylan Sampson to be good day one. I feel pretty solid about that Quinshon Junkins day one bet because of his size, speed, strength, experience. All of that stuff makes me feel like, okay, he's 225 pounds. He's 6 foot tall. He's super fast, super quick. That guy, that build of running back has a pretty solid track record of translating to the NFL pretty quickly. And like, Maurice Jones-Drew, like anybody who evaluates running backs, they identify this dude as a pro-ready guy. Now, Dylan Sampson is not that, right? He's not saying he can't be good year one, not saying he can't be good right away. It's always a possibility, but he's just not the traditional build of a guy who's going to be amazing in year one. He's not the traditional skill set of a guy who's going to be amazing in year one. We have to be honest about players out that Tennessee offense that is such a deviation from what you're going to do in the pros that there's always a translation period for those guys. Whether they play quarterback, whether they play offensive line, whether they play wide receiver, whether they play tight end, right? These guys coming out that Josh Heupel system are just playing a different brand of football than what you're ever going to be asked to do in the NFL. Remember all the growing pains we had with somebody who had an NFL-ready profile in Cedric Tillman because of that Tennessee offense. Now, it's not as extreme for running backs as it is for wide receivers coming out of that offense, but I still would imagine that there are some adjustments that are going to have to be made in that transition for Dylan Sampson, and that's what makes me not the most confident in the world about his ability to hold up his bargain of what he needs to do in order for his running back room to operate the way we want it to in year one. Year two, year three, you ask me then, I feel much better about Dylan Sampson in a year two, year three scenario. Year one, though, I worry that we're putting way too much on him. And if I'm right about it, right, and we're putting too much on Dylan Sampson, and he's not really ready for 150 carries in year one, and maybe he's ready for like 60. Well, where do the rest of those 100 or 90 carries go? Pierre Strong? We give more carries to Jerome Ford, knowing that his efficiency is not, inelastic? Or elastic? My bad, not inelastic. Inelastic means does not stretch. But his efficiency is not elastic, right? Which means it's not going to grow as you add to it. So what is it that the Browns' plan is if Dylan Sampson is not ready for all those carries? What's their pivot? Who are they going to go to? This is why I thought having Nick Chubb would be a really good thing for this team, because it takes a lot of the pressure off of Dylan Sampson in year one. You could just have Quinshon and Nick Chubb split carries and then have Jerome Ford and Dylan Sampson fit where they fit, especially for a team that's going to run the ball as much as Cleveland. That's why I thought Nick Chubb had functional sense, right? A lot of people were saying, well, what do you want Nick Chubb to do? Get 80 carries? No, I thought Nick Chubb could split carries with Quinshon and we can wait to see Dylan Sampson. I don't see why there's such a rush to get him on the field. Quinshon, I understand. Second round pick, that profile, that style of runner, you want to play right away. Dylan is not that. And I don't know why everybody's just acting like it's going to be day one. Running backs can take time to acclimate to the league too. And I feel like we're just assuming that just because the dude plays running back, it's going to click. Just because he led the SEC in rushing yards, it's going to click. And it doesn't always go like that. Sometimes it takes a little while. And that's my concern, because I don't feel great about our pivot plans if that plan does not work out. And again, we're looking at the trifecta of why the Browns offense was as awful as it was. The running game's a huge part of that, and upgrading the run game is a huge part to the Browns being better this year. Let's move on to my next fear. Are we going to find out that Kevin Stefanski is just not good with young quarterbacks. And what does that mean for the rest of the Kevin Stefanski era when it comes to the Browns being able to develop a quarterback? Right? What does that change with the Browns' plan? Like, if we find out that Kevin Stefanski just stinks with these young quarterbacks, like he asks too much of them, he's just not a good developer of these guys, because there's been enough funkiness with young quarterbacks that it's fair to ask the question, right? As good as Baker Mayfield was in 2020 and as good as it looked like Kevin Stefanski was for Baker Mayfield in 2020, something happened in 2021. And I know Baker hurt his shoulder and everything, but some of that stuff didn't feel like it was just physical with Baker Mayfield. It looked a lot like it was mental with him, right? The same thing could be said of DTR, where it's like, I knew DTR was a 5th-round pick and that you shouldn't expect much, but it felt like we got so much worse out of DTR than what we should have gotten out of him, right? Now, to Kevin's credit, with these veteran quarterbacks, these more experienced guys, I think he's gotten a lot out of those guys, and I think he's done a really good job with those guys. I think he got more out of Joe Flacco than anybody could have expected. Same thing can be said with Jacoby Brissett. You go back to his Minnesota days, he got a lot out of Kirk Cousins. And that's where Kevin has that reputation for being a quarterback elevator. And I think that part of that is true. I think Kevin does a lot for veteran quarterbacks. I think there's a bigger question when it comes to younger quarterbacks. There's that 1 year with Baker Mayfield in 2020, and then there's everything else. Deshaun Watson is somebody you can consider a inexperienced quarterback, right? By the time he got to Cleveland, he played about 3.5 seasons. Remember, he tore his ACL halfway through, I think like 6 starts through his rookie year. And then he played 2018, 2019, 2020, and sat the entire 2021 season, and then sat half of 2022. So by the time he got to Cleveland, he had only played 3.5 seasons of football in the NFL. And as much as I think Deshaun Watson underwhelmed these expectations based on other things going on with Deshaun Watson, I can't help but wonder if Kevin actively got a worse result than what he should have, even with Deshaun. You know, so like, it's not like what happened with Deshaun. Like, yeah, we could blame all of that on Deshaun Watson, but like, we didn't see Kevin elevate Deshaun often. And that's the concern for me, right? It always felt like there was friction between the two, the same way that there felt like there was friction between Baker Mayfield and Kevin Stefanski. And Baker Mayfield's, ironically enough, third, fourth year in the league, same amount of experience Deshaun had when he came with Kevin. Like, are we going to find out that this is just not the kind of coach you want to pair with a young quarterback? And that leaves the Browns in a pretty strange situation, right? Because the only way out of where the Browns are, well, there's only 2 ways out, right? There's drafting a quarterback and there's trading for somebody else's. And trading for somebody else's quarterback, it's always a dubious proposition because quarterbacks are the most valuable resource in the NFL. So if somebody's willing to give you a quarterback, something's up, right? Whether that be age, money, something's up. Right, you're not getting a on the up and up great deal for somebody else's quarterback. Like, this could be something that puts Kevin in a spot to where the Browns would have to move on eventually from him if he cannot develop young quarterbacks, despite the fact that he's a pretty solid coach. As good as a coach the Browns have had since 1999, and I wouldn't be surprised if Kevin went somewhere after Cleveland if we find out that this is the problem. That has a more established quarterback situation and looks pretty good. Because, yeah, I think with the veteran quarterback, Kevin's really good. The issue is, how do we get Kevin to that point to where he has a veteran quarterback? And this year, I think we will know what the answer to that question is with Kevin Stefanski, young quarterbacks, right? If Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders both look like absolute dog doo out there, it's not a good sign for Kevin, right? Because one of those guys, I'm not saying got to be good or decent, but they should look like a regular rookie, right? You know, there should be some ups and downs here and there. But if it's all downs like it was with DTR, And then you gotta start looking at Kevin kind of sideways about his ability to work with young quarterbacks, right? Because right now I'm willing to give him a little bit of a benefit of the doubt because he's really only dealt with limited young quarterback situations, right? Inheriting Baker Mayfield, and to his credit, got a really good season out of Baker. And then the whole Deshaun Watson thing, it's hard to parse out what was football and what had to do with everything else Deshaun Watson had going on while he was in Cleveland, right? Dorian Thompson-Robinson, there's a big question like if he was talented to begin with. But even then, we'll see what Philadelphia is able to squeeze out of him. We all kind of assume Philly's a pretty good organization. So what can they squeeze out of him, right? If he looks good in Philly, then that's going to be something we think about when it comes to Kevin. Again, I got no questions about Kevin's ability with veteran quarterbacks. It's really these young quarterbacks where I have all the questions in the world. And, we could find out that he's just not good at that. And what does that mean for our future? The best coach we've had since 99 can't work with young quarterbacks. It's like, damn, it puts us in a hell of a spot, doesn't it? What do you do? What do you do? My last biggest fear about the Cleveland Browns is on the defensive end. These have been offensive focus, but now let's kind of jump over to the defensive end. What if we find out that we're about 2 years too early on our hopes with this Browns defensive line? Because I think everybody who covers the Browns sees the vision with the Browns defensive line and the resources that they put in there. And I think that vision is overwhelmingly positive. People are really positive on that vision. Spent a top 5 pick on Mason Grant. You spent a 2nd round pick on Mike Hall. And, Isaiah McGuire was a 3rd round pick. You're a 3rd or 4th round pick, and you're hoping that all works out. And you have a super young defensive line to complement Myles Garrett. And if the Browns are successful with that grouping, right, Isaiah McGuire, Mason Graham, and then all these other young players that they have on the defensive line, then that means they're going to be young and cheap next to Myles Garrett and really good for the next 4 or 5 years. And that will be amazing, right? The savings on that will make the Myles contract feel like nothing. My concern is, what if we're just a year or 2 early on our hopes for that defensive line? We forget in our excitement about Mason Graham, about Mike Hall, that they play defensive tackle. And defensive tackle has notoriously been one of those positions where guys often don't get off to a fast start. Right? It is one of those positions that just takes a while to physically acclimate to the NFL, where a slow start is expected, right? It's the offensive line, it's the defensive line. Have there been guys who came out right away and were amazing? Yeah. Is that everybody? No. So it wouldn't surprise me if Mason Graham got off to a slow start. It wouldn't surprise me because Mike Hall missed so much practice and games last year. If he hit a little bit of a rookie wall in year 2, and halfway through the season, we're looking at this defensive line, and it doesn't feel like Mason Graham is holding up his end of the bargain. It doesn't feel like Mike Hall is holding up his end, and we're going to be very disappointed with that. I feel like the vision and the hope that we have for the vision of the Cleveland Browns defensive line is accurate. My concern is that the timeline that we're hoping that happens on is a bit early. But those are my biggest fears about this year's Browns team. You guys let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.